more cast signs out?
Go ahead and pop.
Oh, wow,
More
welcome to
signs.
Thinking Green. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. I'm a little out of practice. We haven't had a show since March, so today is the first day back. Not quite live. We're taping on Monday, and the show will air tomorrow, Tuesday night. And I have with me Cassandra Martineau, who is the Green Party's candidate this year for Congress in the 2nd District. So welcome, Cass.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be kicking off the return of your show.
Yeah, you know, it's been a long haul. We always take summers off, but this year's summer started in mid-March.
It's been a crazy year for everybody. Yeah, so y'all can see the mask around my neck.
Yeah,
we're masking up and keeping our distance right now.
Yeah, we're usually
doing
huddled
everything we
around
can
the
to be
table.
safe. Yep, doing everything we can to be safe.
So I guess the first thing I'm going to ask you, though, is like why you're running. I know you like thought about the idea a couple years ago, and you kind of halfway thought about it this year until you did it.
You know, it's a big responsibility, you know, to the Green Party, and just, you know, to try and make a serious run and take that, you know, seriously and dedicate all that time. So I did waffle, I admit. Because I take it seriously, and I want to do it well if I take it. And I'm probably in a better space than I was. I lost our caucus to Michelle Louise Bicking, who was a fine candidate and somebody I was happy to lose to, and I feel like I'm even better prepared now than I have been before. As I've seen and as I've watched over the last 30 years, I've just seen so much on both sides of the aisle becoming more and more corporate, and so much of our federal government becoming more and more authoritarian. Certainly since 9/11, that's increased. Obviously, with our current president, it's just gone off the scale. But you know, we're still here in the midst of a pandemic, and we have, you know, the Democratic presidential candidate is promising to veto single payer. You know, we're coming in the heat after a summer long of protests and rallies and trying to make changes in the way we police people. And, you know, the Democratic presidential candidate is, you know, promising no police reforms and pro-police. We're in the midst of the greatest income inequality we've had certainly in my lifetime. I don't know exactly where the figures go, if we're getting up to that robber baron discrepancy yet, but I feel like we're going drastically in that direction. And you know, I think that was Speaker Pelosi who's, you know, promised not to eliminate any of Trump's taxes on the very wealthiest. And I feel like these are all very much the wrong directions to be going. And, you know, even as, you know, our current president gets more and more extreme, Democrats are showing themselves to be an alternate to Republicans, but not a clear opposition. And some of the trends that I've seen, and in my mind, these are, I'm about much more than this. Check out cassforcongress.rocks if you'd like to more details. But my 3 big items are single payer health care now, not incrementally. I'll go into all these a little greater detail in a bit. Green New Deal now with local, you know, community-oriented control and implementation and maintenance, so that we really create a lot of local jobs controlled by local communities. And, you know, income inequality / Wall Street influence on Washington. In my mind, that's just all the corporate mess that we're in. Citizens United, in my mind, is just bribery legalized. You know, we need to reinstill Glass-Steagall and other regulations on Wall Street. Really need to get a hold of the economy to make it work for, you know, people, not just the corporations and the millionaires and the billionaires. And these are all issues that most people are very concerned about in their day-to-day living. most people are for making these changes, and yet somehow neither major political party seems willing to address them. You know, I feel like, and it's been going this way for a while, but I feel it's just come to such extremes with both the major parties just saying, well, you know, those guys are so scary and those guys are so evil, and therefore just vote for us and don't use your critical thinking skill and don't think about the issues. It's all about team. We need these issues. These are not purity test issues, as the Democrats like to, you know, debase, you know, the most popular policies that everybody wants. These are life and death, you know, bread and butter, day in, day out issues for most of us.
And I think it is true that, you know, with all of these issues, they've been important for a long time. You know, the Green Party has been in favor of single-payer health care for at least 2 decades. And, you know, we've never taken corporate money for campaigns. But I think there's an added sense of desperation now that so many people just feel at risk and it's not just a feeling, that really are at risk of, you know, I don't know, even if we don't have a fascist government happening next month, we're headed towards feudalism.
At the most optimistic. Yeah, you know, unfortunately, the Democrats had some pretty draconian immigration policies. Certainly, you know, I think everything has gotten so much more dramatic, and, you know, that's partly with both the political parties just really ramping up the rhetoric in incredible ways. But I feel also COVID has just shown how exposed and how fragile our economy is. And when we have so many people who are paycheck to paycheck to paycheck and have that disrupted, you know, we're working on trying to get rent freeze moratoriums, you know, for people now so they're not homeless before winter. Is that insane? You know, why are we trying to build an economy that we have to serve instead of building an economy that serves us?
Well, you know, I think this might be a good time for me to ask you what kind of involvement you have locally in local office and other community groups, because I do believe that all of these national issues kind of boil down to local impacts.
No, it does, and that's why so much of this is day to day, you know, considering the income inequality, how many people are marginalized and just, you know, living on the edge. You know, I'm kind of an activist turned candidate, so I am on the Zoning Board of Appeals, not exactly your up-ticket position, but I've run for office a number of times in Windham, Willimantic. I'm also part of a lot of groups and have really, you know, helped add my voice to the values of these groups. You know, I'm one of the state leaders for the Women's March on Washington. I'm an executive officer in Windham, Willimantic, NAACP, because, you know, racial tensions, along with everything else, have gotten worse and worse. And, you know, I feel it's beyond time that we start acting and improving with that. I have been the chair and vice chair of the Windham Green Town Committee for 4 or 5 years, something like that, running, during which period, and I'm not taking credit for this, I was honored to be part of a really active team when, you know, Willimantic got in more green candidates, you know, enough to put us within the Green Party, you know, up with some of the biggest national numbers for our town. So I'm really proud of the team and, you know, the way we came together and worked for each other and made that happen. You know, and it's like with that, and one of the things I've learned from all of it and what my candidacy, I think, is so much about, it's not just about me. You know, it's about these ideals that we're fighting for. It's about the groups and the community who are supporting. I mean, obviously, you know, I'll tell the listeners, you know how much work you've done, and I've had others contribute and put so much faith to me, and it's, you know, that really only inspires me further, because anything we get done, you know, I feel very strongly that, you know, I've done some amazing, wonderful thing, and I've been part of amazing groups. None of it's because of me particular, but it's been because I've joined with so many people. And when we join together, really amplifies our voices and amplifies our power.
Now, from the start, you've really been insistent that your campaign is primarily about issues that frankly won't get discussed if there isn't a green voice in the debate. So maybe we can talk about some of these issues in some detail. We have plenty of time. Do you want to start with healthcare, and we'll work on
healthcare is one of my biggest. And again, I'm kind of, I am honestly, sincerely promoting my own values, but the ones that I'm putting to the fore are really the people's agenda. Things that most people in 2nd District and the U.S. in general want. Something like 80% of Democrats, half of Republicans want single payer now. I suppose they've read the information and they've seen, the higher life expectancies and quality of life in other countries that have this. They've seen the fact that this is going to save us, according to the Office of Budget Management, bipartisan or nonpartisan, we're going to save $450 billion. We put so much of our money in healthcare in the U.S. that, goes to profit, that goes to advertising, that goes to all these, middlemen, insurance companies and pharmaceuticals, and everybody who needs a cut and needs a share of profits. It's all corporate America, and corporations are legally required to make a profit. They're answerable to their shareholders. Maybe they'll make things a little more efficient and they'll save some money but after that, they still have a mandate to continue to improve those profits. And how do they do that? They up co-pays, they lower the services, they pay. I was talking with a nurse who was very frustrated because her office is not getting full payment for some of the Medicare patients. And, that's saving them and the corporations running all these organizations a lot of money. It's serving us very poorly. It's one of the reasons almost 70% of bankruptcies in the United States are due to medical conditions. Too many of us are, one bad accident or heart attack or, severe illness away from bankruptcy and from being thrown onto the street. And one of the richest countries in the world, that's just unconscionable to me. As far as I'm concerned, I'm going on and on. I've got some passion for this one.
Go on.
I think it was a really good idea 20 years ago when even then, 68 or 70% of the bankruptcies are medical. It was a really great idea 10 years ago, and epinephrine and Lantus and, insulin were skyrocketing because, the pharmaceuticals were leveraging our lives against their profit. I mean, literally. Which is just, and during a pandemic, it just seems unconscionable that we would not be instituting it. We've got a disease out there that's killing people, that's leaving people, even the ones who survive, with long lingering effects. And yet, the Democrats who are supposed to be the opposition to Republicans, Republicans are saying take it all away, and Democrats are saying, well, let's have that profit-driven ACA a little bit, but we're not giving single payer. And it just seems to me, from a budget standpoint, from a moral standpoint, from any kind of common sense standpoint, it just, my mind boggles that we are not doing this. It just makes so much sense.
Well, I helped work on getting a resolution passed in New London City Council in support of Medicare for All. And when we were doing research, there are so many facets to that I think if more people thought about it deeply, the numbers would be even more extreme that people wanted, because the idea of not just municipal budgets, but people's taxes, but having your health insurance linked to your employment. What happens when you have job loss? And linked
what happens
to your
if you want to move a job and that makes it challenging? I've talked to people who are stuck in marriages they'd rather not be stuck in because their spouse has really good insurance and they need that. And
how insane is actually having your health insurance tied to what your marital status is?
How insane is it that it's tied to what your employer is? How many minimum wage people, and they do the trick to get around having full-time employment, and so many poor people, and I've had to do this myself a number of times, are stringing together 2 or 3 part-time jobs to get that money for it, and guess what? They're still not getting health insurance. As much as I speak against the corporations, I want to say I am for small businesses. I think they're the heart of our communities. Having single-payer health care is going to take a great burden off of our smaller shops and our mom-and-pop shops and our little community stores, and help make them a little bit stronger and more solvent as well.
That's true. And actually, the big businesses would benefit as well. And I'm in general against business, corporate subsidies, but to be competitive in a worldwide market, it's really even hard for our larger businesses to compete. When I used to drive my little Corolla that was built in Canada, I would say, it was built in Canada in a union shop, and the reason Toyota could build a low-cost car was that they didn't have to worry about health insurance for the employees there. Mm-hmm. So even the big companies benefit, although I think on a more day-to-day basis, the small businesses and the entrepreneurs are the ones who really feel it most.
Well, having to pay all these extra layers into healthcare, because every single provider, insurer, whatever, needs to take a chip to get their profit, makes it a lot more expensive. Yes, this is actually a financially responsible decision that's going to save us all loads of money. I'd like to think corporate America would be in favor of that. Perhaps not the insurance companies and some of the other ruling donors.
Right. Well, I think in general it might be just the top, people at the top of the pay scale. I'm sure, middle level insurance workers would find other employment that was similar skill sets. Well, on a different topic, but also something that would help us in so many ways, the Green New Deal, making jobs in a peace economy. How do all those pieces fit together?
And, it's becomes a little challenge to disentangle it, because in my brain, all of this just comes together in one big, horrible corporate dominance knot. So I've been following the science of this for, ages, more than 20 years and beyond. And, I feel like we're at that point of, the old saying about, planting a tree, where the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and next best time is now. Scientists have gotten more and more dire in their warnings. They are reluctant by nature of, scientific discovery and, their language that they use to be a little conservative in their estimates, and they're literally telling us move away from the coastlines now, because we have a very, very small, short, and rapidly closing window. I've been reading like 4 to 5 years now at this point. Certainly by the end of the 1920s, we need to really drastically reduce our carbon imprint on this planet. We've already begun to see climate change. It's not a theory. How many 100-century storms a year do we need before this becomes usual? How many drought seasons throughout Connecticut and 2nd District, extended do we need before we start taking this seriously? How many more high windstorms knocking down lines and trees all over do we need before we believe in this? Part of the problem is that we're gotten into the space where we're actually, even if we stop putting all carbon in right now, the Earth is involved in a whole number of runaway systems, such as global ice melting in the North Pole and around there means we've got more Black Sea instead of white ice, so more heat is absorbed into the ocean. It becomes so even beyond the carbon cycle. Same thing as we get some of the tundra areas thawing up that haven't been frozen, have been frozen since before the Ice Age, and they're releasing tons of methane as they do, which only increases global climate change. If we start changing some of the ocean currents, it's going to make things worse. We've already made the polar vortex instead of... Little history of Connecticut, we always complain about the variability of weather in Connecticut. There's a good reason for it, because the polar vortex normally goes about halfway through the state, and we've got the shoreline on the other side. Makes it kind of variable. But instead of going in a fairly regular polar vortex, it's now going wiggly and up and down. If you look at the maps, it's insane. We're trading a stable climate. It's not just about warming. We're trading a stable climate for an unstable one. And we can see that right here in Connecticut with our weird, mild winters, with our freakish storms that seem to be coming with greater intensity. This is affecting our day-to-day life right now. And, we don't need incremental, we don't need, solutions that are going to keep the Koch brothers happy and, big oil happy. Let's end all those subsidies to big oil. They're raking in profits, by the billions and trillions, and they don't need the subsidies, they don't need the tax breaks. We really need to return to, or get into renewable energy sources. Connecticut has been something of a leader. We've, with our wind farms we're doing, but it's really too little, too late, and we need to step up our game. One of the proposals I have is not merely supporting Green New Deal, which I'm thrilled to death AOC and some other Democrats have picked up from the Green Party. It's also trying to have a local component to it. So let's have the communities, start restructuring the manufacturing base that we have in Connecticut. Instead of making so much weapons, start building some more wind turbines and some of the other hardware that we need. Let's create jobs while saving the environment. I'd also like to see these, rather than owned by large corporations, again, Eversource, their big job is to get profit. They're going to have as few workers as they need to get by. So, if they're short-sighted when a big storm comes, guess what? You're waiting a week. If we do this in smaller, less profit-driven, community-controlled, evidence shows, we're amongst the problems of energy is just not the creation, but the distribution, and making power more locally will help with distributing it. It's got much shorter lines to go on instead of trucking across the state, to satisfy from a few nuclear power plants. But also giving communities more control means that they can control the prices of it as it goes up and make it a lot more affordable for their own people. If it's controlled by local communities and local politicians, I feel they're always going to be, by necessity, a lot more accountable to the voters, because you just walk over next door and hey, Mayor Bob, what's going on? Somebody's right at your door, as opposed to somebody far away in Washington doesn't see that. So, I would love to see us start moving towards a carbon neutral society, but I want to do it in a way that empowers, creates jobs, and returns that power more locally so that more people are empowered about their power.
Now, you hinted that one component of this is to have less of our manufacturing going to making weapons. So I'm pretty sure that you are the only candidate in this district that is talking about reducing military spending. So how would that work in terms of the totality of our economy?
So I want to say I was just on a debate earlier today, so I actually got to hear the other candidates answer on that. It appears the Libertarian candidate is for reducing war spending as well. So I just want to, but the Republican and Joe Courtney certainly are very much for that. Obviously, electric boat is an important part of the economy around shoreline, and nobody's going to eliminate that. But what I see right now is all our economic eggs being put into one basket. What I also see is the United States is spending, multiple times like all the other world governments in military spending, and that Connecticut is, one of the heaviest military spenders and, military manufacturers here. You build a bomb, you drop the bomb, it doesn't make any more money. If you build a school and you hire new teachers, they're always feeding back into the economy. If you start building up some of these local infrastructure for energy and other purposes, that goes back into the local economy. What we're doing now is very restricted. I've heard the incumbent say too many times how he's brought so many jobs to Second District when, he's brought some jobs to the shoreline, and that's wonderful. That's great for those people on the shoreline in that area who have it. But we got a whole other district up here, and I'd like to see those economic benefits from federal projects be a little bit more broadly distributed and enjoyed by the population of Second District, not just focused on one or two little urban areas.
And as someone who is on the shoreline, it does concern me that that the economy is so dependent on this one type of manufacturing that I think it's fragile, and people kind of get that it's fragile. So you want 2 subs a year, because if you don't get those 2 subs a year, it can have a catastrophic effect, domino effect on the whole economy of the region. So diversification at the very least. And I think of all those other things that we import that we could manufacture, and train cars and trolleys, and there's a lot of large-scale manufacturing of items that we need and we're importing.
And most of the renewables right now are being bought from China and Germany. Let's bring some of those manufacturing jobs right back to the U.S. Second District used to have a great manufacturing base. We've forgotten that, and I think we need to return back to that. But that's the big concern about having all those economic eggs in one basket, is that any candidate pursuing that theory is tied to it. And so we see a Democrat incumbent who will happily pass any of Trump's crazy erratic tax breaks for the rich budgets as long as it's got a submarine in it. And it just, that dedication to that one thing kind of limits your ability and limits the flexibility I think that we should have to bring those benefits out, out to some of the rural communities, not just the urban centers, and being able to keep our kind of rural character of that quiet corner at the same time.
Well,
so I think green energy is a great way to go for that.
I mean, if you look at your lawn signs, they're very theme-oriented, and one of them that is going like hotcakes, I have to say, is Main Street, not Wall Street. And about 10 or 15 years ago, our Peace and Justice Network had a meeting, and we were kind of outlining all the problems we saw in the society, the war on drugs, and the military, both in terms of EB and the manufacturing, but also waging war abroad. And there were so many, like a dozen issues, and they all kind of boiled down to the fact that things were being done to benefit corporations and not to benefit people.
Wow, where to start with that one? It's the move towards a more corporate America began in my mind, and actually I believe it was Jimmy Carter who initiated political triangulation, but Clinton's brought it into full fruition, which is the basic principle that the Democratic Party would move further and further to the right to capture Republican votes, while those of us on the left would have nowhere else to go. Guess what? We do have somewhere else to go, and when we go there, the Democrats get angry at us for pushing these issues. The corporate capture of the U.S. government, and again, I've seen this process over the last 30 years where politicians on both sides of the aisle decided to focus on more well-off contributors and corporate contributors because that's where the money is. So we've seen things like Glass-Steagall fall apart, aside, and deregulating Wall Street, deregulating everything. Well, the big corporations are raking in the money. 1% has gotten so much richer throughout this whole period, and even more so during Corona. But the rest of us have suffered. It's all focusing money upward at this point. And as far as I'm concerned, Citizens United, which is, basically Supreme Court decision that, as far as I'm concerned, honestly makes bribery legal. They're equating money with speech, and it's just as an atrocious piece of corruption as, the original crooked decision 120 years ago, 130 years ago that decided corporations were people. Corporations are not people. Money is not speech. People are people. Our voices are our speech. It shouldn't be $1, one vote. It should be one vote, one vote. And the more extreme that we concentrate money in the hands of a few, the worse this seems to get. I know Republicans are out crying about their freedoms and all that. As far as I'm concerned, the more control corporate America has over our lives, if we don't have that government blocking and working for people and standing against the corporations are going to fill that void. And we still don't have freedoms because so many of us are economically, depressed by this system that, it leaves us with a lot fewer choices in life. To be able to live in decent, good quality life, people need a certain standard of living. They deserve health care. No working family should ever be in poverty. And yet we have this all over the place. And it's leaving, it's profiting the corporations really well. We've seen campaign donations skyrocket, and the costs every year going up and up and up, and who's raised this much money and this, who's got the best ideas? Why did we stop talking about that? And it's all about who's got the best corporate sponsors, and that just leaves us with a lot of bad choices. And politicians who are bought and funded by those corporations, they have corporate laps to sit on. They go through all kinds of twists and turns to try and make it appear like it's not so. But
there's often no other explanation. And you mentioned freedom, and it seems like Americans are somewhat misguided. You think about freedom to go without a mask and to wherever you want, or freedom to have unlimited access to firearms. But I did spend part of my life living as a practicing socialist, and it's really another kind of freedom to be freed of worry that you're going to lose the roof over your head, or that if you change what job you're doing, you won't have health insurance. And I see that a lot of people here are very burdened by things that they don't really need to be, except a decision has been made not to provide for basic human needs.
And I would love to reverse this entire equation. It should be government for the people, of the people, by the people. Not for the corporations, of the corporations, by the corporations. Our priorities are all wrong, and it should be people first. We should have government serving people, not people there to serve government. We should have an economy that serves, the greatest amount of people, not just a very few at the expense of everybody else. How much freedom do you have if you're forced to work 3 part-time jobs with no benefits just to be able to pay the rent, which a lot of families are stuck in? And the leverage of that threat means that most people are going to take whatever cruddy job, they're going to take whatever abuse, they have to from their employer, and employers do use that against people. This whole article about how Walmart comes down if an employee stands still for 5 seconds, they're doing wage theft. They're stealing time or whatever. It's criminalized. But wage theft is so common throughout corporate America. People having to work longer hours without punching in. Having to do extra work in business outside their hours. We're just being taken advantage of. That promise that unions fought, shed blood for, and stood for, that promise of that 40-hour week, is all but gone right now. And the less power that people have over the basics of their lives, the more easy it is to leverage them into worse and worse circumstances, the more easy it is to drive by fear, which is what we have going on both sides of the aisle. I feel like they're not even talking about issues anymore. They're just like, oh, those guys are evil, those guys are scary. And, there may be people I like or don't like on either side. People are people, but let's stay focused on those issues, and let's stay focused on making it human-centered and bringing that economy back to serve, our working families.
Now, because you've worked in education, I just wanted to ask you about your feeling about public education and what direction it's gone and where it needs to be.
High-stakes mandated testing, basically what I consider a more corporate view of education, was brought to us originally by George Bush under No Child Left Behind. Barack Obama basically had the carrot of the stick of the same, high-stakes mandated testing. There are some tests that can be beneficial to teachers and help inform their pedagogy and, their lessons and the rest of that. Make sure, little Johnny is not falling behind on something so we can teach him what he needs to know. But tying this in, with all the funding is basically led to well-off counties. And, anybody knows Connecticut knows how balkanized we are. And, I love to bring my own towns, Mansfield and Willimantic, side by side, and I've worked in both those school systems, and they're night and day, because one is a well-off suburb, and they've got a lot of money to put in the school system, and Willimantic, we've got a lot more services, and not all our population is as well off, so our school systems aren't okay, and this is a continuing circle. But the mandated testing tied with funding, just exacerbates that even worse. So the poorer towns, places like Stafford or Willimantic get special masters because we don't, make the test, and they come in and they get rid of bilingual education. This happened in a town that's half Hispanic. It's insane. They do things like cutting out art and recess because we've got to get those test scores up because of the funding, and that's just doing everything backwards. I'm sorry, children are not data points. Stop saying poverty isn't an excuse. Poverty does affect things. Healthcare does affect things. The child who was struggling to pay attention in my Willimantic kindergarten class when I was doing my internship, who was homeless, is not going to be in that same space. And holding them stricter to attention and forcing them to do the work isn't helping them. It's just building up resentment. If we don't meet people's needs, they're not going to come into school prepared. And that's all tied together as far as I'm concerned. Never met a teacher who really loved those standardized tests. Good pedagogy shows that project-based learning and, more community-controlled schools are a lot better for communities and students. I'd love to see us get back to that and see the federal government there to help out communities that don't have the money, rather than punish them with special masters and losing all the extras that the well-off suburbs expect, and everybody should have access to, as far as I'm concerned. This is a quality of life issue.
It is. And New London and Willimantic, I'm always so struck by so many parallels between the two communities. And both in terms of the richness of the community and the poverty in other areas. So although, you know, you're making this campaign about issues and not identity, which so much politics is about, your identity story is actually more interesting than most. And I wonder how you've been informed by the journey you've been on.
I'm running as an open trans woman, and I am not shy. I'm out and proud about that. I'm not putting it at the forefront of my campaign because we've had enough trans candidates, I believe, and their identities have been just sensationalized, and it's been, oh, is the trans candidate, you know, and yes, I am trans. I also have a lot of good policies. However, my root of having lived trans, and you know, even before I had transitioned, I really lived a very marginalized life. So when I talk about, you know, working families trying to piece things together from a couple of low-paying part-time jobs, I know, I've been there. I've been on the wrong side, you know, of a system that will change its parameters because you have individual people doing that, and you go into, you know, any public building and it's like, okay, am I going to be served properly, or are there going to be roadblocks thrown up? You know, I go into, you know, I have a medical emergency and get brought to the hospital, and, you know, everything's, you know, I've got a dozen people around helping me and everything's going great, and then the person asks, when was your last menstruation? I'm here like, oh, funny story. Poof, you know, you can almost see those cartoon puffs of dust as everybody left out. And, you know, the one nurse who I suppose pulled the short straw, you know, stayed with me and condescended at me the whole time. And, you know, it makes someone like me afraid to use medical services. If I, you know, and I've been at Wyndham Hospital other times and been treated perfectly and professionally, so I don't want to say this is a blanket statement, but you don't know what you're going to get. And I know, you know, this is the kind of, I don't want to overlap too much between racial issues and, you know, the gender issues, but those of us who get marginalized, I think, develop a very similar perspective towards organizations and, you know, departments and everything else, services, you know, that work well. I know how well these services work for me when I was taken as a regular cis white male. I know how the services serve me when I'm taken as a cis white female, and I know how the services serve me when I'm out as trans. And those are three different ways that we get treated. My very body, my very experiences are direct proof of the imbalances that we have in this society and how it doesn't work fairly for everyone. And, you know, I could get angry about that in my private moments. I probably do. But at the end of the day, you know, I have to look and say, you know, what kind of change can this inspire me to speak for? And so, you know, these are not issues that, you know, are just philosophically friendly to me. You know, they're issues for me that I will continue, you know, I've been fighting my whole life, and I will continue to fight for my entire life because they very passionately and personally touch me and, you know, touch other people like me. Again, it's not the same for all marginalized people. We all have our own shoes to walk in, but I think there are a number of overlaps, and it's probably a lot more drastic than most people realize. You know, if you go to the hospital and you don't know if you're going to come out alive because of whether, you know, the nurses and doctors are going to bother treating you, you know, it becomes a terrifying expedition. And this is our very lives being talked about. You know, if you're going to be, you know, if a police stop because you've been going a little too fast or because you weren't doing anything wrong at all, and you're being pulled over and wondering if you're going to come out alive, which is the experience of black people, you know, not so much, you know, me as a white trans person, it changes the whole equation. And having experienced some of that, you know, I think I'm a lot more open and understanding about, you know, more of it and more dedicated to trying to just make that right. I very strongly believe that, you know, you can complain all you want, it doesn't do a lot of good. You know, you need to come up with some positive solution and try to move towards positive changes. And that's so much what my campaign is about, and I feel that drives my passion for these issues. And why I say, you know, for me, if you're a really well-off, comfortable white guy, you know what? You're probably okay either way. If you are marginalized because you're female or because you're queer or because you're black or because you're poor, you know, everything is so much more on the line, and it's a whole different game. So, you know, I've got real street cred, as it were, to bring to that in a way that I feel like my competitors in this race don't. And, you know, I would love to be able to bring that to representing, you know, a much broader swath of second district than is currently being represented.
And so I can't totally avoid the Green Party is so often accused of like being a spoiler effect in races. We are seeing some changes, ranked choice voting in Maine. But so what is your answer if someone says, you know, you Greens are just, you know, trying to wreck it for the Democrats?
Yeah, we're just actually Republicans in disguise. No, come on. You know, first of all, and, you know, it comes back with the 2016 election with a great furor and statisticians twisting around any numbers they can do to prove that the Green Party blew it for Hillary Clinton. First of all, I want to bring it back to my original discussion of political triangulation. You know, the Democratic model is that the left has nowhere else to go, and if we're doing it wrong, they're going to come and attack us. They're also defending their corporate agenda and attacking our values. But statistically, it's absolute nonsense. You know, Jill Stein got 3% of the vote, 40% stayed home. More people stayed home and didn't vote for any of the horrible corporate candidates that were presented because they weren't meeting our interests than voted for either Trump or Clinton. And that's the fact, you know, we don't owe our votes to the Democrats. The Democrats owe it to us to earn our votes. And, you know,
as do the Greens and the
and I'm happy to, as everybody does. You know, we shouldn't be voting by which team is our favorite or because the other team is so scary. You know, this could tip into a discussion about ranked choice voting, which might free up people to vote their hearts a little bit more than, you know, the drastic necessity of the least worst. We're not messing it up for Democrats. We are the only voice holding them accountable. And at every corner, I see the Democratic Party avoiding accountability. Hillary Clinton's book, Why She Lost the Election, was all about how it's everybody else's fault. I'm sorry, take responsibility. You know, you want to get me out, you want to kill the Green Party, spoiler effect, whatever, steal our platform. If we're a real threat to their power, they'd be instituting single payer. You know, everyone thinks the New Deal was brought forth by these enlightened Democrats who just gave it to us, and it's a bunch of malarkey. There are 10, 15 years of, you know, trade unionists and socialists and communists making real threats to democratic power, and that forced them to adopt the platform. They're not doing it.
Yeah. Please steal more of it.
You know, I've heard more than one Green Party person say, steal our platform, steal our candidates, we don't care. You know, but there needs to be accountability. Without me on the ticket, nobody is pushing for single payer now. Nobody's pushing for the Green New Deal. Nobody's pushing for getting Washington out of D.C. And these are the three most critical issues facing us. It's just appalling to me that rather than take responsibility and try to make things better, you know, the Democrats need to look for a scapegoat. I'm sorry, take responsibility. You have horrible policies. Your tepid policies and tepid corporate candidates aren't inspiring anybody.
So we have about 5 minutes left. So I was going to ask, how can people find out more about your campaign or request lawn signs or get in touch with you?
I have a website out there, castforcongress.rocks, and it lays out my platform, including those 3 issues and a few others. Also has ways to get in touch with the campaign. We've been giving out, you can see some of our signs over here: Main Street, not Wall Street, Green New Deal, Single Payer Now. Thank you. Sorry, failed diction. And a lot of people I'm finding are really excited about these issues. We will happily give and bring you a sign, if we need to. We don't require a donation. If you choose to donate, that's on the page too, and that will help pay for these signs and getting out this information. info@castforcongress.rocks will be the email to use if you'd like specifically to get in touch with us. That'll be forwarded on to me and my treasurer/campaign manager. So, we can address everything there.
Interviewer, exactly. And people, actually, I've been finding, are having a lot of fun kind of choosing what issues they want in front of their houses.
And I made, this is kind of a tip to Doug Larry, who loves to recycle our campaign signs from year to year. So I'm trying to get this so it's in the screen here. So I've got my information on the top. If for some reason I don't win this year, or I'm not running again next year, you can just cut the sign in half and you still have a great issue sign. So, again, it's less about me in my mind than it is about those issues. And those are the values that I really want to bring forth. And they're things that everybody wants, that's going to make life qualitatively better for everybody. It seems insane to me that we're not doing. So I may be a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us.
and I'll just close by, I guess, showing people the ballot in Windham in the community calendar later. That will be the outro. You'll be able to see the ballot from New London, from our voting districts. Oh yeah. Okay. And you can zoom in on it.
There we go.
Line F is the Green Party line, and you can see that this is the New London ballot, isn't it? No, this isn't. This is the Windham ballot. On line F, you see Howie Hawkins and Angela Walker. We have a presidential and vice presidential candidate, Cassandra Martineau for U.S. Congress, and then the local candidates in Windham, Jean Dismay for Registrar of Voters and Anevia Beidou-Keen for mayor. So it's a pretty full line in Windham because you have an active party. And one thing that we've noted is nice this year is that people have time to really look at the ballots, and they're just not rushed and trying to make a decision.
Especially with the absentee ballots. A good quarter of our town, I did a lot of volunteer work at Town Hall. Because I'm a candidate, I couldn't have contact with the ballots, but folding envelopes and stomping and labeling them to help the absentee ballot go along. So we got a good quarter within Willimantic who are doing that by absentee ballot. Take a look at it. I'm not going to be we're going back to the spoiler. I'm no spoiler for Joe Courtney. That 1% is not going to pick into his lead. Even if I managed to get 2%, 5%, he would still be very comfortable. But maybe be a little uncomfortable and start looking at these issues because he wants those voters back, and start taking those more seriously. The more of us who join together and fight for these values, it's going to take courage. It's going to take work. I'm not, giving anyone a free handout. It takes dedicated work on all our parts and courage. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for running.
Thought.
Thank you for being on the show. Line F, you can pretty much be assured that all the candidates are coming we're not a monolith, but everyone is coming from similar point of view in terms of issues. And
anyone who thinks we're a monolith has clearly not been one of our meetings, be it local or state. We're strident individuals, all of us, and leaders, and we encourage that in everyone else as well.
We do. So keep in touch, vote, of course, and thank you, Cass, for coming down from Willie to be with us today.
All right, thank you. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Yeah, well, it was fun. And with that, I think we'll see you. We're going to have tapes the next 2 weeks and hopefully be back live at the end of October.
All right, so with any luck, I'll be able to get that and get it out to Charter or Spectrum or whatever they're calling it.
Yeah, we'll try to spread it all around the beach.
Thank you.
Africa.